So any temporary problem and also the fundamental problem of samsara, of cyclic existence, can be solved through this precious human rebirth. Sorry, solved using this precious human rebirth. So recognizing the value of this human rebirth and then maintaining mindfulness of its value throughout our activities is what will allow us to bring forth the courage, the determination to cultivate effectively. Pardon me. Just want to turn off that box so we can see everybody. Okay. So if we don't recognize the qualities and the special features of this precious human rebirth, one of the things that will happen is that when we encounter obstacles and unfortunate things, we'll find that it is easy to get discouraged, right? That it is easy to lose our resolve. And also we can see through the examples of the knowing and wise advisors, right, the cultivated spiritual practitioners, what is possible through using the human rebirth, the sort of high level of spiritual realization that is possible. And of course, we can also see what not to do, because there are many beings in the world who continuously engage in the kind of activities or behavior that are harming both themselves and others. So we can see that even those who are harming others, right, that it comes from a mistaken understanding of how to fulfill a wish, that wish in the very bottom of their heart to be able to be free from suffering and achieve real happiness. And unless somebody is kind of truly, we could say, mentally ill, not of sound mind, all beings, whether human beings or animals, have that fundamental wish to be happy. So what happens is all of these beings, as we stated, they have this wish to be able to achieve that stable happiness. However, they are affected by the afflictions. Hello?
Can you bring your mic closer?
Oh, okay. I thought it was too close. Is that okay?
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. I guess I just need to turn down the gain maybe, and then I can have it the same as before. Maybe that works.
That's good.
Is good? Okay. Yeah. Let me know if I fade out again. So shall I repeat that then?
Yeah.
Did people hear it? Okay, I'll repeat it. So all beings have this fundamental wish to be able to achieve this happiness, but because they are affected by afflictions, those afflictions compel them into the wrong path, by which they end up destroying the causes of happiness as if they were their enemy. And it says actually in Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara very clearly that because of this fundamental root problem of ignorance, that sentient beings destroy the causes of happiness as if they were a terrible enemy. So the thing here is, if we allow our mind to be led down the path of the afflictions, not only do we destroy the causes of happiness, but we also end up harming both ourselves and others. However, if we follow the path of the positive mental qualities, if we develop the positive mental qualities such as love, compassion, patience, and follow a path accordingly, what we will find is that we become capable of being a source of a benefit and happiness to both ourselves and others.
어다 던지지 장안조 로용 세계도스 어다 야미 걸어라요 던지 로용 세계도스
And this happens in a process that we call lojong, or mind training. And that's why the first text that we'll be looking at today is known as the mind training, 7-point mind training text.
어다 야보 전에 로조 야보 전에 다 안조 강가 다 세대도 연도를 보게 가제 특대 건지시에도나 어다 니가를 기보타들 기보타 쳐버렸어.
So if we study and practice these lojong mind training teachings well, and not only do we study and practice them, but we actually really mix them with our mind, then not only will we ourselves become happier, but we can also contribute to the happiness of others.
어다 던지지 승현도
So that was Geshe's short introductory remarks for today.
어다 뭐야말이 야보데 레레 지는 로게 예수 비토네 알레도 모시와 지는 대슈스.
So think I want to use this a human rebirth in a positive, effective way. And then in preparation for that, let us place our body and mind in a calm or peaceful state.
좀벌리 가사 갈초메 비타세 가사 갈런도고 여르테 강가 지르니다 세 이치 넘바시 바조들 파더송 송.
So think the mind, which is attracted to all of these objects in the world and is going to and fro, wandering from object to object, that we want to center this mind and we want to take that wandering mind and focus and dissolve it into the mental consciousness.
초메베소스 강가 롤로타 멜롤 하다바노 이차 세텔 치터 용고요 소마다.
I think that any unskillful or unhelpful thoughts, by kind of taking the outward directed mind into the mental consciousness, it's like breathing onto a mirror. That wetness of the breath dissolves into a point and disappears.
세 그로바 강가 초메베세 강가 세 조어들 치터 차소나 드니 류용 치터 차와레스 류용 치터 차소나 다 세도 류도 다 강가 레레지레소 소마지.
I think by dissolving these coarser aspects of mind into the mental consciousness, we are also bringing the winds that may be moving throughout our body into the center. And that by doing this, then the mind and the body become very peaceful.
레레도 쇼와카제 전타 셰바보 조지 자탄 중화지 강가 잔용바 레레 차송 소마지.
And the secret here is that because these winds or prana within the body are kind of the major mount of activities, when we are able to calm and dissolve the winds in this way, the 4 element constituents of our body are also brought into equilibrium.
리두스는 생아도 만다와다 데스 만다와나 레레 쇼와 차송 소마지.
I think that through contemplating in this way, then my body and mind, they're not in the same state as when I sat down, right? My body and mind, they are more peaceful and calm.
던지겠다 세 조데 그룹에 아니 그러게워요레 만디 류마땡을 게워요 세요레 만디스 류마땡을 세지렌디스.
And when we calm our mind like this, we can also tap into a knowledge of it, that the mind is neither by its nature virtuous, wholesome, neither is it non-virtuous, unwholesome. The mind subsists in a fundamentally neutral state, or we could also say equanimous, equanimity state.
Mokha tumba noji, ane jachimbo, kuyumba, ane tupa do repa meaba. Haleage nesichindu sekoro.
The mind is vast, unencumbered, open, and empty like the sky.
Mokha tumba no ngaros shawa karishena karina zazo toya nesi momboji was detondawaji. Oh, samba.
And because through the sky's emptiness, we see that all of these activities of the weather and so forth are possible within it, in the same way, based upon the mind's empty vastness, we can accomplish all sorts of things.
Nikage deshi, tatuge deshi kawa, chibayina yata page jalando toyagata, nesi yatsimbuji des.
And that means that within this mind, whether we are seeking temporary happiness or more ultimate forms of happiness, we can definitely bring forth the causes to achieve them.
So singing clearly chinitane, zabato demba, chushito demba, ta shawa, kaze zonato zoyo haleage nesichitis.
When we work upon the mind, we can achieve a fundamentally patient state, a state of relaxed contentment.
Rong le pemba, ye le pemba, rong kiva, ye kiva, ta nes karedeva yina ta seti. Zotoyak kor nipachitis.
The benefit of oneself or others, the happiness of oneself or others, all of these things that we strive for, they can be achieved on the basis of working with our mind.
So mine zachima tsugoyona tate mashapala tame pandawachi somachi.
And if we really see ourselves as precious or important too, we'll realize that our own well-being, it really depends on cultivating our mind. There is no other method.
Kale mombo jagagumandu, dosi mombo to gagumandu, ta lele generosua ganyachidus.
You know, to work with our mind doesn't have to be something difficult. And certainly it's not something that requires us to have and spend a lot of money. There's a very feasible way to cultivate it.
Tendri shaw pasuba kanga kaze to the sosingenita, the modri, the chachi, the Asonji shoji sembasola, techi the sohatayo somachi.
So think in order to be able to accomplish these activities with my mind in a stable and successful way, I will single-pointedly make requests to the holy beings, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, for their assistance to do that.
Lama yeto sonji shosekanga ngarosolo page. So
as we make these praises and requests, think the lamas, the spiritual teachers, the yidams, the meditational deities, all of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, and holy beings are in the space in front of us, just like if we had laid out kind of a vast assembly of different objects in front of us, that we can see them very directly. So we'll start the prayers, but actually since we're tinkering with sound today, I wanted to ask Dave, like, has the chanting been okay recently, or is there a setting that I should be adjusting so that?
Yeah, the chanting's been fine actually. When it's when the that setting for musician setting, when that's on, it's perfectly fine. But since we're tinkering with sound, you could turn the gain for Geshe down a bit.
You can turn the gain down for Geshe. All right, let me try. So I'll just put it to where mine is, which is about a quarter less. There we go. All right, let us begin.
This one.
Oh, this one.
Yeah. Dewa Sheba Jide Jimba Jivo Loye Galo Gyurwa Lana Meba Ladon Minongi Temba Sonji Jode De Bejawa Shaja Duwa La Shanze Lo Chere Gyazo Deje Sheba Dajomba Yondaba Zube Sanje Reba Dang Shazo Demba Dewa Sheba Jide Jemba Chevo Ndoye Kalo Gyurwa Lana Meba Lado Mino Jidemba Sonje Jondende Ejawa Shaja Duwa Shaza Lo Jeda Shaza Jo.
The short mandala. So refuge and bodhicitta.
Sonje Jidon Zojo Jono La Shonju Madu Dane Gyazu Chi Dagi Shizwe Jebe Tsuno Je Lola Benchir Sonje Drava Jo Sonje Jidon Zojo Jono Shonju Bado Dani Jasu Jo Dagi Ibi Tsuno Ji Rola Bi Sonji Rowa Shu Sonji Jido Suju Shuno Bado Dani Jasu Jo Dagi Chishi Jibi Tsuno Ji Dola Beja Sonje Dowa Ju. Oh yeah, that thing that to me shawa kachimbotel da ganzo se tsumaya bochi sokuyares.
So in terms of the activities at the beginning, we have to well prepare or cleanse our mind.
Aka ngaro su ta de chen chise jidu des kale jaga waso hota kale jasa na ta ki woche lo ju to nyale chege de pge pi abochil ndo je pasu subachil
So we're going to spend a little bit over an hour today engaged in this activity of study and practice. And whether that becomes a significant cause, whether it becomes significant merits, really depends on the preparation, such as the motivation that we establish.
And we
can say actually that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, these beings possessed of these vast minds of realization, right? That attaining all of that, it really came through paying attention to the activities, to the motivation at the beginning.
And
when we think about the hearers, the Shravakas, or the solitary realizers, the Pratyeka Buddhas, they, like the Bodhisattvas, also put tremendous effort into cultivating the practices, such as the paramitas, the perfections, and so forth. And so they accomplished that, and then as the end result, they achieved liberation. But they achieved a limited liberation for themselves alone, not a state through which they could benefit others. And so that smaller result than the Bodhisattvas, this happened mainly based upon the motivation, right, that those Shravakas had at the beginning of their practice.
So
therefore, in the beginning activities to help bring forth this motivation and also to purify the mind, we cultivate the practices of refuge and the mind generation, or bodhicitta.
And so
of course, when somebody is speaking the Dharma, as Geshe is in this case, then we recite these verses of Sangye Chutsukma, the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, in sort of a it's at a clipped pace, isn't it? But actually, when you're at home and cultivating your meditation session, ideally you would be taking more time. So for example, after the first part of the verse that deals with refuge, you would be taking time to kind of relax the mind and really bring forth that mind of refuge. So the ideal practice is you would recite these first two lines of the Sangye Chutsukma prayer, which are for the bringing forth of refuge, and then you would pause and try to bring forth that mind of refuge within your continuum. If you're not able to bring it forth or maintain it in a stable way, then you would recite those two lines a few more times and again try to bring it forth, and in this way achieve stability with the mind of refuge. And then once you've brought forth kind of a stable, nice feeling of refuge within your mind, right, then you will turn to the second half of the verse, which is the mind generation or bodhicitta. And you can also experiment to see what works best for your mind. You can try meditating on the refuge first, and then reciting the words of the verse and see if that moves your mind, or you can try to verbally express the refuge first through reciting the verse and then meditate on it. You can see which works better.
Then the guns that then spaghetti desaling and Gamayana, Gadigal Amasachi, which Lorisuchi Nuruchi is a cause jab. That Lorishia gets a share. I go jaggy in Tubashia Yoba touch about it. Then to go jam.
So there was a very famous Lama at one of the three seats Ganden monastery, and he was getting a lot of requests to teach the Lam Rim, the stages of the path. But he said that if all I have to say is this: if you meditate on the Lam Rim that I've already taught, then there will be realization. If you don't meditate, there will be no realization. I have nothing more to say, something like that. So yeah, if you meditate, then definitely you're going to get realizations, and really there's nothing apart from that to really tell you. Yeah.
penal netse Geshe te goja chin tiseri o pagso male pada
Gechu padro
gapano so goja matman.
So this Tibetan concept of chi or commentary, right? There's many different kinds of commentary. One type of commentary that a Lama can give is known as the nyamtri, the experiential commentary. What happens here is that the Lama, based on his or her own experience, will teach the text. And ideally what happens is the students then go and meditate on what has been taught. When they develop experience of that particular topic in meditation, they come back to the teacher for instructions on the next topic. And especially when it comes to Tantra, right, this experiential style of commentary is very, So for example, the Geshe gave a commentary on one of the Tantric topics yesterday. Ideally, that would actually be presented as you present the topic, people go and meditate, and then once they've had experience, they come back for more.
So
Geshe said that he's not saying that he is teaching the Tantric commentary based on his experience. Please don't misunderstand. What he is saying, I think this is related to some people are like, can we have more classes on Tantra? What he is saying is that because there's like a break of a month in between the classes, you have lots of time to meditate and develop experience on the commentary that you've already heard before you come back. But mainly the function of the meditation, of course, is to establish a relationship between what has been taught and your mind, right?
Goja bikala sales hop the kaze pagete boshuna tani nojila go maja bikala tel patwa chimbondo ya kachimbo tani patinika dozon yar no yares.
So when we meditate, we develop a stable feeling for what we are cultivating, and then based on that stable feeling, the thing that we're cultivating, we're actually very easily able to apply it and practice it within the post-meditation session, so within our daily lives as well.
Oh, ta moto so ta yo ta la to se rumbas jani ta lele deis.
Okay, so we are going to now take another moment to do a brief meditation. So first, let us calm our body and mind.
So
the first step, don't think about anything in particular, and through emptying the minds of thoughts, we can touch a state of peace.
Yina nika ge shawa so jire ma to tela tene tene ta to shira ka re yina ya jin do ya me ai sa pe to mo de so ma ji.
But if we keep our mind just in this kind of state of non-thinking, it might be peaceful, but we can't improve ourselves. So eventually we need to bring forth the practices of method and wisdom.
Teno so so ta no ne la tene shi da sing ane den de ma de pen den de ma de se ne so mo bo chi so de yo re so de re ma de.
So we live our lives whenever we encounter a difficulty by thinking it's based on some external factor, some external enemy that is somehow affecting us. But this way is actually mistaken. Chigidrara.
Kange kanga take it shil ma de ta so so no lig no this.
Fundamentally, the problems are not based on this external enemy, but ultimately the causes of the problems are something internal within ourselves.
Te tsu ma sa ya ta ta ya shu te ta ma do tan do sil pa gen ze ge ta wa yin na yo. Da chi chu ma de kanga ni so ma ji.
To purify this mistaken mind, we have to develop the feeling that any being that we can point to, whether human, animal, and so forth, none of them is fundamentally our enemy. Every one of them could possibly be close to us.
So so ya ye ma do tan do sil ta wa yin na yo. So so ni ga ge de shi yong sa. Ta de ge de shi yong sa ge ta ho zo han ra wo chi chu ren du so ma ji.
So develop the feeling that any being that we encounter, human or animal, they are potentially the source of our temporary happiness. They are potentially the source of our ultimate happiness.
No nan ro ri chu sin shi yu zu ta. Ye za chim bo ye za te do la tni de ji pu zu ba chi te ko de che de. Ana su ji ko bo to ba sha ge so ba chi sha ju se.
So think because all these 6 types of sentient beings are in close relationship to me, I want to be able to lead them to perfect happiness. In order to be able to do this, may I achieve Buddhahood to be able to really benefit all sentient beings. Meditate on bodhicitta.
Kange yu zu me ba so ge sa ro je kange me ba so ge sa ta ha le ak se po ba te ya ni pa te ya ta cha la kan di chi.
To be able to have this opportunity to bring forth a mind that can eradicate not only our own problems, but the problems of all beings is something really incredible. Think about the value of that opportunity.
Tendri shunju se za chim bo de la chowa ta ja sha ji ze ma de me ba yin na yo. So so cho me be kange jin ja ya wa no ji ta pa ka yin do yo ras.
And even if we're only able to bring forth sort of 1% of that mind of bodhicitta, we will already be able to see our problems diminish, just like a rainbow fading into the sky.
Zemo ze wa no xin ne ta sunji ji ko bo de sunji ji se de se de ta ki bo jin do ya ge ne. Tendri ya zemo chi ren du so ba chi.
I have the opportunity to, just like a playful game, through cultivating and experimenting with these practices, bring forth bodhicitta. Eventually, bring forth Buddhahood. So we can pause. Geshe said, if I hit the gong at the beginning, I also have to hit it at the end. The gong's mallet has not been found, by the way, so I'm using a candlestick today. So meditating on bodhicitta, meditating on love, if we don't know kind of how to do this correctly, it can seem like it's something a little bit difficult. But actually, if we know how to meditate on it correctly, we'll see that love and bodhicitta, rather than being something difficult, there's something that can help us to bring forth tremendous courage as we live our lives. On the basis of cultivating great compassion, our own kind of grasping at our problems starts to diminish. The heaviness of our own problems diminishes. And through seeing the problems of others as the primary concern, we actually become courageous and really capable of helping them.
나자 누가 차침부 강가로가 매바 저기 손비선지 요바이나 저 토도 마도세 대하게 계자 가가를 마도 간디게 세를 걸어 뽑아지요.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives the example of a doctor who becomes determined, thinking, I have the motivation to eradicate all disease from this world. Now, of course, whether he or she actually has the means to completely eradicate that disease, that's a different discussion. But on the basis of that mentality, they become a very courageous person, determined to help others. So if we really develop through meditation a feeling for compassion, one of the things that we'll immediately begin to experience is that feeling of that heaviness of our own problems begins to dissipate. If we can fuse that experience of compassion with an understanding of emptiness, then the diminishing of the problems and the courageous attitude that we're able to bring forth becomes even more powerful. And then also think about this practically. If all of the people around us, we have this feeling of they are precious, they are precious, they are precious, then the severity of our own problems will naturally diminish because we're not so focused on it.
소소 치지 아예 때에 비도하고 야보시나 근데 때라때는 소소 끼고 매와 타도도 던지서나 되나 가디나 끼고 매와 그래서.
However, if we focus on others in a negative way, right? Thinking, for example, our neighbor who is maybe more wealthy and successful than we are, and developing feelings of resentment or jealousy, then others become a source of our unhappiness rather than a source of happiness. So it's really how we develop our mind in terms of this relationship to others, isn't it? If we think about the reasons why they are close to us, then we will have good relationships. If we think about resentment and so forth, then we will have poor relationships. So then in order to benefit these beings in the very very best possible way, then we have to take that we call the self, that we call the I, and bring it to that state of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, complete and perfect enlightenment.
Sunji chasi de ate tangi kita ke jam woshi tsare yede yel ba chige jujure mo de chike tomba yede zuke tomba sono to ki wo manda wa chinde yares.
And becoming the Buddha, we've talked about this before, but it bears mentioning again. When we become the Buddha, we achieve our own ultimate welfare through the truth body of the Dharmakaya, and we achieve the welfare of others through the attainment of the form body or the Rupakaya.
Ota teji yapo me ta teji chi teji peche to ne o chwa shun te yapo yar ma to shamba to ni ji ser yel pedo chujo za ya sono sha mo boji te sha te was.
So we understand that through cultivating these principles, right, we also come to our own ultimate welfare, also by cultivating love and compassion. This bears mentioning here because, because of the focus, others may think, well, we're all constantly focused on others. Are we not taking care of ourselves? So that's actually not a correct.
Loro chimbon jimbo kanga no la mazon kapi kandi si pitapo. So ba yede so na. So Lama
Tsongkhapa explains very clearly in the great treatise on the stages of the path and the middling treatise on the stages of the path, the Lamdram Chenpo and Chimpo, that actually through focusing on achieving the welfare of others, one's own welfare is naturally achieved. One does not need to cultivate that separately. And in order to be able to purify our mind to become this ultimate source of benefit to others, we are looking at two texts. And so we're continuing, of course, with the 7-point Lojong or mind training text and commentary. And also, in terms of the last part of the class, we are going to be beginning a new text today, Aryadeva's 400 verses or stanzas. Aryadeva was a great being who was one of the principal students of Nagarjuna. And so this 400 verses is a very important text, so much so that very qualified lamas such as the glorious Chandrakirti, Lama Rendawa, and so forth, all composed commentaries on that 400 verses. So also being aware that it might be a little bit of a challenging text, Geshe thinks that some people, it's also very long, so some people might get bored if we go through the whole thing. So we are starting at a particular chapter and we will cover various verses at various important points.
So
hopefully we are all going to be around for a while, so there's no rush, and slowly we'll be able to cover more and more of this text of the 400 verses. So we'll see if every year, Geshe-la's goal is that every year we can complete at least one chapter of the 400 verses of Aryadeva. That's how he would like to try to cover it. Yeah, so we are on page 8 of the 7-point mind training commentary by Tokme Sampo. Youngna chela jeyina.
Yon neje rawa. Yon neje lande ina chi chengdo sartes. Yon neje lande ina nyen thuma mebane cheje shajala sobasi. If
the harm doer is a god or a spirit, think, through beginningless time I have consumed your flesh and blood, so now in return I offer my own flesh and blood, and so on.
This one? Oh, that's also never she get Latin della Sobata and Dina you, Hakosarawa, only Corosolo Data, shadow, Tandigo eyes, only need to know. Ota Tandichitapa, 세계 디니파 때봐 저기 somebody 숨도was.
So because these types of harm givers, because they require blood and flesh and so forth to survive, then this is what we offer, our own body and blood and flesh to them.
어떤 안중인에도 또 토야다 니가 지려 말와 사다 이나까지 때도 소미토는 못로 줘야 하레스.
So we obviously are not in a state of realization where we can actually give away our blood and our flesh right now, but we can imagine or visualize this as a way of contemplation.
어다 니는 집 니는 뉴아스 니 초로수 샤도 샤와 토마메 바네다 돈레 디바치 사차수 투차수 다 딜랜드 나파 블레틱이 라고 지생도was.
And also important to highlight the mentality here, right? First, the practitioner is acknowledging that in the past, from beginningless time, I've taken your flesh and blood. So my offering you my flesh and blood is actually like the repayment of a debt.
어다지 몸보지가 고사라와 손진 좀벌리려 요비깔 코로가 주만노가 맞춰 몸보지 원치아데 냐마질 뭐하자니 중소하레스. 어까 디딜 단다티 준다고지 수마레스 손지 로지.
So there's also this awareness of paying a debt. 상계기 중바레스, 게주치기 중바레스. 여보 고마워.
나 손지 코로요 사자지가 와스. 하고서라 티 tumba makanga lolo neva mala tene nimachil chuswas seswas.
So one day the Buddha was in a village and all of the occupants of that village were wounded or died in a war.
tene 다시 그거가도 코로스 할레베 세조워치 칼라요 마상간 존노지 다 센티존에 할레베 조워치는 nimachil denwas.
And so because of witnessing that, some of the disciples of the Buddha, such as Ananda and so forth, they were kind of like despondent and depressed, right? Like us, they were perturbed by what they'd seen.
다 손지가 체도 요르테네 이나에 다 코로스 깨쳤던 가르쳐서 도로스 조워시 워덴도 간가. 아니 좀 약간 야 가르쳐서 내서 세리 어다 만주 준비 뭐 간가로 세차레스 봉사와레 아니 다 될라테네 다 할레베 조워렌다고.
So the Buddha So the Buddha, right, of course, possessing clairvoyance, he already knew that the disciples were disturbed, but he asked, right, Ananda and the others, why are you so depressed and despondent? And they replied, well, our countrymen, they have all died in this conflict, so why is this? And perhaps they had a doubt because we see in many places of the scriptures, right, the Buddha would chant an incantation known as the words of truth. And on that basis, in many cases, wars and conflicts could be pacified or diminished. So basically, from reciting a formula that said on the basis of these words of truth, if the promises of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are correct, may this situation be completely pacified. And merely through reciting that, right, often the situation could be cleared. And so these words of truth, they are similar to the words of truth that we recite. For example, if you recite the mantra for multiplying offerings, Om Benza Benza Maha Bidya Benza, after that, there's the words of truth that multiply these offerings. It functions in the same way. And so pacified on the basis of truth is what this phenomena is called. So through reciting the words of truth, the obstacle or the difficulty would be cleared away. However, in this particular case, the Buddha, no incantation that the Buddha recited could diminish the situation because it was a powerful karma that necessarily had to bring forth a result. So this powerful karma, specifically this layer of collective powerful karma, is kind of so heavy that these things that may have worked in other situations, like the words of truth, would not be able to clear it.
다 레토데 간데스 찬데스 레샤와 가마라 다 단다 거로스 좀 바마 강가 사자지를 여바제 아니 냐체 뭐지 처음에 퓨처에 서서 하시 여바데 제가 말했겠잖아 아니 냐체 뭐지 쟤는 신문지는 거로스 사이 오데 고야 샤시
Yeah.
냐차 레비 쳔보지
오두마지.
그래서 뭐 더네 다 단데 강에 뭐 제피타하게 디필로 또치치
So some of you may be familiar with this story, but the Buddha explained that why he could not do anything, why the karma of the inhabitants of the place where this war was so powerful, was because in previous lifetimes they had taken a big fish. It's actually more like a whale, how it's described, out of the sea. And they kept this fish alive, but would continuously tear strips off of its flesh so that they could eat it and use it. And in this way, right, it endured suffering for a very long time.
So that
was the very heavy karma behind why they experienced that suffering. So understanding that, right, in the past we may have accumulated similar karmas with this kind of mentality, right? We offer our flesh, blood, bones, and so forth to those spirits.
Get a new guitar.
Sorry, I'm the one having a bit of allergies today. Okay.
저쪽으로 가디나 또 수망이 있으면 어디냐 말이야. 지시거리 야마트 그다도 거거든요.
So Geshe said that the protectors benefit him, but not myself, because he actually has very terrible allergies normally. But when he speaks the Dharma, then the allergies dissipate. Whereas me, I don't suffer so badly from allergies, but during the Dharma talk, my allergies come back. I don't think it happens that often, but okay. So having said this kind of very maybe heavy story, Geshe said, maybe this is a story that was a little bit heavy for folks. He'd like to share another bit of a lighter story. So at the time of the Buddha, there was a gentleman who was elderly, and because of his old age, his capacity for study and practice was limited, but nevertheless, he became a bhikshu and entered the Sangha. So actually, at the time, many members of the community, they expressed a doubt about whether this older gentleman should become a monk or not. But the Buddha, through his clairvoyance, said that there are some good roots, there is some good karma that will allow him to ordain and enter the Sangha. But he found that after he became a monk, a lot of the other Sangha members were kind of looking down on him.
아니 다 거봐요. 그걸 롯데 챔버이나 소노테지 비도 보야보 또 야 이사라왔어. 다 와서타네.
야.
아니 다 되는 이마치를 거 디셀레비가라 손지가 그가 샤리프 뭔가 보이사래. 뭔가 보이나 다 손지 그트 자 챔버지를 저 도매지라. 그 사자tin 데딜 로쇼 온다고 거든요도.
So then he became a little bit discouraged, but then one of the Buddha's disciples, Modgalyayana, sorry, is everything okay with the sound? Yes, okay. All right, so one of the Buddha's chief disciples, Modgalyayana, he kind of took the older monk aside and said, we should travel to a place together.
판로비갈 콜을 그서 뭔가 여러 저 두면 왔어. 콜을 저 매에서 기세 타는 전에
And Modgalyayana went to this place by flying because he possessed these miracle powers called the legs of magical emanation. But the older monk did not, so he had to grab onto the outer shawl of Modgalyayana and hold on to it as they flew through the sky. And eventually they arrived at their destination, which was a large building near the shore of the ocean.
근데 뒤놀로 그니 전에 전전도 단딩 아니 가르쳐 갈래 알았어. 뭐 그렇게 좀 먹어줘요.
And the older monk was asking Mogalyayana, why did you bring me to this strange place?
다 뒤놀로 야 로만도 때 못하는 구하는 치모지 하라 와. 실로 맞지 레비깔라. 실론 따리 건약 리고 주주래도 알았어. 구한다고. 냐 치모지 리고
Nyagi Rico, Dine Sojo, Kambadi.
뭐 그거 냐코로 리고기네.
Nangula.
미 실로라. 리고 주주래스. 놀로 그러니 너 살아 왔어. 놀로라.
Yabokomasun Tana.
냐 리고 첨보지 구한다고.
Konso Kamba Nangla Drosun, Kambadi.
구한다고 레스. 냐 리고 레스.
Ale.
구한다고.
Loso.
그러니 때노 때못하는 뭐 번도 왔어.
Ale, loso.
실로 말레비 가르더니 기계자 집어. 단데 가르레스. 하고 살아와. 아니 뭔가 벌게 집에 뭔가 단데 저렇게 셔왕가 마트레스.
Ale.
구반다 버리고 침보지 와라.
Loso. Ine Nyadi Tronso son Rua Ruko.
주주들이 그 마드면 들어가는 처음에 듣는
So then Modgalyayana took him inside this structure, and eventually he realized that this kind of building was actually an assembly of these very massive bones. And so he asked Modgalyayana, why did you take me to this? And he said, actually, these are the bones of the sentient being that you were in your previous life.
더니고 파파레니 하고 살아와. 그 던지 디세질래가 있다 손지기 지에는 딘로쇼 사지세.
Sange.
손지기 내식 지기로와. 어다 코 딘로나. 고로셔왕가 빠빠도 도소나. 아니 때라데는 고알은 민주지 고타발 로토고.
And he had this kind of realization, right, of his past life, which allowed him to, as the Buddha had seen, if he went to see this, he would be able to bring forth the renunciation necessary to achieve the state of liberation.
어다 더니고 고알 베트 할래니 다 고아세 아텔 땐데 처음도 소마치는 니 때라데는 민주시 때라데는 다 팀버를 못마도 타와도
So through seeing that previous life and seeing the connection between lifetimes, he really saw that known as samsara has no beneficial essence. In this way, he was able to bring forth the mind of definite emergence, and in that lifetime achieve the state of liberation.
어다 손지도 때는 지서 로마도 걸어서 가로서 디셀레나 따다 지데 가르시가 레스미네 디셀레나 걸어서 따다 틀레레
And so the Buddha's Tara, all of the enlightened beings, we can understand that they are waiting till we get to a point in our practice to be able to show us similar insights, to through their miracle powers be able to benefit us.
걸어서 야태하게 따짜진다고도 야르더니 가로서 내주 사트메 이사탄에 자체도 야.
So we often talk about like the hook of compassion of all of these holy beings. So they have this hook that can reach out and lift us all up, but the problem is we haven't made the slot. We haven't made the slot where the hook can fit so that they can benefit us.
어다 단다데 빼지래. 그래서 렌저가 빼고 거기 야래라 다 기보 그냥 좀 두아스.
So this is really to a story to illustrate the importance of the teachings on karma or cause and effect.
야치칼 판도비칼 콜 제트메 콜파 뭔가 야나 티노가 두아스. 지그리 코니까 지바용 주고요. 니가 저지래.
And it is said that actually the older monk and Modgalyayana Putra, they went to this kind of house of bones, and remember we said that he was holding on to Modgalyayana's shawl to get there, but through the renunciation and the realization that he developed just from seeing that house of bones, when they flew back, he was able to fly through his own power. And when he returned, we don't know that the other monks saw his miraculous manifestation. And in fact, it is said that they may have continued to look down on him. However, because he had achieved the state of a foe destroyer, he was completely undisturbed by that.
다 단다 좀 단다 된데 같이 모여. 저다 맞아 이렇게 하면 이러지 혼자. 팔라시. 미 단다 좀 렌저 페이지 터치 그거야. 그래서 같이 뭐지?
So Geshe is saying that to cultivate these instructions, because I was saying we haven't covered much of the text today, but to cultivate these instructions, this understanding of cause and effect or karma is something that is really important. So to have, as we offer our flesh and bones and engage in these practices of taking, giving, this attitude of this is just like a debt that I am repaying. If we can do that, we can give, right, without holding back, and the practices become more beneficial for the mind. So we'll come to a discussion of this later in the commentary when it discusses the 5 powers. But basically having this attitude of experiences being like repaying a debt as well, thinking that this problem or this difficulty that I'm experiencing is the result of my negative karma. Through this, may myself and all beings not be able to experience it again. This is also a very powerful way to practice. So by thinking and saying aloud, eat flesh, eat bones, drink my blood, consider that the harm doers' hunger and thirst are pacified through the consumption of your flesh. Unadulterated bliss fills their body and mind, and they master twofold bodhicitta. And we can see that when we practice in this way, even on the imaginary level, that this practice of giving becomes similar to that of the being who became the Buddha, giving his flesh to the tigress in a previous life. So when we say unadulterated bliss fills their body and mind, and they master the twofold bodhicitta, of course, in our current state, this is not something that we can actualize, but we can imagine them experiencing this. And working with the imagination in this way is a little bit like our Vajrayana, our tantric practice, isn't it? So they master the twofold bodhicitta, so that's relative and ultimate. Imagine that you offer your body to all the gods and spirits that consume flesh and blood in just the same way, and that they all become satisfied, happy, and virtuous. Thus, since all faults arise from self-cherishing, recognize it as the enemy. And since all benefit and happiness come from sentient beings, view them as close allies and try to help them. So we come back again to this fundamental realization that comes from this cultivation, which is that all of the problems and difficulties that we experience, these are fundamentally arising from our self-cherishing. And all benefit and happiness that we experience comes through a mind that cherishes others. So since all faults arise from self-cherishing, recognize it as the enemy, and benefit and happiness come from sentient beings, view them as close allies, and do whatever you can to help them. CJ, yeah. So, as Langri Tangpa said, no matter which profound Dharma texts I consult, I find the message is the same. All faults are one's own, and all qualities belong to brother and sister sentient beings. Given this crucial point, the only conclusion is that we must give all profit and victory to others and take all loss and defeat upon ourselves. So you'll see that reference to the 8 verses here. Yeah, so sorry. So Geshe also mentioned Langri Tangpa. He was one of the great Kadampa lamas. And so the awareness that he's trying to point to here is that awareness that every difficulty that we experience can be traced back to this fundamentally self-cherishing mind. And all benefit that we are able to experience can be connected to this attitude which cherishes others.
다 계신 노릇 타바세는 다 가서 들이 주주조래는 살다. 계신 노릇 타바세는 또 뭐버그마 아마산 셰비가라 할레비 빠빠 캐사오진.
Ale, shukma double.
Okay, 할레비 캐사지.
So Geshe said we're telling a lot of stories today, but he wants to tell another one. This one is about Geshe Langri Tampa. And Geshe Langri Tampa, when he was born from his mother's womb, he was born in a kind of like a strange bag of flesh, and it had kind of a very odd appearance.
당연히 이나면은 멋이다. 다들 로지치로와. 아니 아마테 시에네 단데 텐데 뒤자지 살았어. 괜히는 바자로 유자래서.
And the mother was kind of grossed out and terrified, and she thought like this couldn't be good. So she threw this strange kind of bag of flesh into the garbage. Actually, she threw it away.
tani ta nyama dize phage kenji lusan ko la was nyama dize katwachis.
And it stayed there in the kind of the place where the garbage was thrown away for around 7 days.
Ani korosolo yumoji yares pomoji yumo.
Yumos na lo chungchu.
Yopo
Sorry. Yeah.
yumo pomoji de nyamachi kenji sa ta gando ka tanichi to ko ki kashe was katanga mate be no. Kashe tinu poguchi was.
And so then one day the house had a servant girl who would take care of the garbage. And so she went out to carry some garbage, and then she noticed actually that strange sack of flesh had been opened and that inside there was a child. And she brought it back to the house, and then the mother, seeing this, she decided to take care, realizing it was a child, she took care of it. And then in the end he became this greatly realized being. So with this final paragraph here, we have completed the section of the text, which is bringing adversity into the path to enlightenment through relative bodhicitta. So then if we were to kind of sum up in a capsule the essence of this practice of using relative bodhicitta to transform adversity into the path, first we could look at our lives and see all of the problems and stresses, big and small, that we encounter. True. However, if we allow those difficult circumstances to disturb our mind, the afflictions arise, and if we go in the directions of the afflictions, we will experience even more happiness and causes of unhappiness. So what we have to do in our study and practice is completely change our approach to this and think that I have this problem, this obstacle that I'm experiencing now, it is no different than the problems and the obstacles that I have experienced since beginningless lifetimes within samsara. However, in this case, I am going to change and not let it become a cause for the disturbance of my mind, not let it lead me towards affliction. Rather than letting it become a cause of disturbance and affliction, I will use this difficult situation, this difficult circumstance, to cultivate the opposite of the afflictions, to use it as fuel to cultivate love, compassion, and so forth. When one is able to apply that instruction, this is the measure of having trained oneself in transforming adversity into the path through relative bodhicitta.
어느 요 어다 근데 저절로 송어전에 준비하래스. 어느 lumba 쇼니라 쇼지니 바지 첨보 강에 첨보래 되네.
Lumpa chonesana?
아 소절 lumba 강에 배 쇼사라와.
Ale, los
아 괜찮아.
los
아 그래서 쇼지니 근데 대조조선으로 또 되는 셀 강에 첨보러 왔어.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he reflects on his own experience, and he said, losing their nation, right? Losing the nation of Tibet, this could become a cause of tremendous disturbance, unhappiness, and so forth.
다 대쟁에 돌은 저한다고 지를 대라 때니 다 lumba 쇼사 이제 자가 롱을 lumba 첨보지 이사 다 대라 때는 좀 멀리고 강가 또다 그게 두고 차야 로바제다 파시 할래야 그래서 여보 뭐 보실 수.
However, if we change the way we are looking at it, we can see that coming from Tibet to India allowed His Holiness and his followers to be in a country where there is freedom. On the basis of losing their country and coming to India, he was able to travel to many different places in the world and make friends and good connections. And in fact, in this way, we can see that negative circumstance actually became a circumstance for something valuable.
가서 lumba 쇼면에 때는 lumba 주지지는 어떤 거 거리라요.
So His Holiness says that if the Tibet was not lost, there's this danger that actually they would have kind of like continued with things as they were before and not really improved.
어떤 것만이나 송선 지수 말을 건데 아니 저런 뭐 lumba 샹다 다 캐나다 아래에 가wan도나 야미국 편에 주긴 여러시기로 왔어 딜은 로건데 지지래 아빠 말에 지지래서 라비가래 아니 근데 그 송원들 심바 다때 아버 쇼번디스 나도 배를 싸다서 뭐가 같이 배를 이렇게 배와를 야르 뭐지 가르서고요 나서 아대요 그래서 싸다서
So His Holiness was joking that when the Dalai Lama travels to different countries, for example, the USA, Canada, Europe, and so forth, normally when that happens, then the party in China will release these kind of announcements about, the terrible Dalai Lama. He is going to like influence people in this country, in that country, and so forth. And His Holiness jokes that actually, like, based upon this kind of propaganda, actually, it's in a way, it's really nice because all of the people in Tibet know exactly where he is and what he is doing. And the news is precious, right? Because oftentimes, the chat platforms and the mobile phones and so forth are monitored or shut down. So it was a way for them to know what His Holiness was doing. So this is just to illustrate this point of like, we have to have this mindset that no matter what kind of obstacle we have, that we can cultivate a different way of thinking about it, which will allow us to transform that obstacle into the path. And of course, that doesn't mean, right, that if we have a problem and there is a solution that we can use to solve a problem, that we don't apply it. Of course, we cultivate those solutions. But the thing here is that sometimes there isn't a solution. So then we try to transform the problem into the path. So in this way, we have completed our broad discussion of this topic, transforming obstacles into the path using relative bodhicitta. So please try to, cultivate this as much as possible in your lives. And of course, we don't become a Buddha right away, and we're not capable of applying all of this right away, but just in increments from day to day, we try to do a little bit more. So now we will turn to the 400 verses. And as I said, Manoshi was kind enough to find the translation by Ruth Sonam, which is excellent. So if you turn to verse number 276, we'll be starting with chapter 12. Yeah, so Geshe just said we'll be starting with section 12.
어다 지금 말을 진행해서는 거는 만도 가르쳐 당한조 알레 되어온도 도지스 이마 온 거는 맞아 되는 로그레스.
So some people might be saying, well, why are we not starting at the beginning? Geshe has a reason for starting here. I think to relate the topics that we're looking at, but he definitely has a plan to go to the beginning and cover those verses as well eventually.
당 어딘지 같이 다 라지 진이 봐봐.
Yeah.
다와시 봐가 봐곰바 템바스. 존에 로데 데니 냠보 내지 샤와시. 마wo 예데 너 예데 먼지 냠보 라요 메사.
An unprejudiced, intelligent, and interested listener is called a vessel. Neither the teacher's nor the student's good qualities will be taken as false.
어떤 눈으로 아니 저 됐더니 치냐마 보고 다 치예데 그야. 잘라 배야 그냥 좋은 데시 자야레스.
So here what's mainly being explained is the qualities necessary in the one who is hearing the Dharma.
사모tumani 있어야 돼. 짜침부 던지지 비비다 버려야 되시 시작은데. 순지 대템바보다 순지 쪼된데 짜침부 던지지래 잔데시 작은데. 하고서라 안 되면 다원아 던지 얘는 뭐뭐지 던지 대라 죽으면 돼와. 로저도 냐레 템보 지금면 돼와. 대가 안 됐으래.
So also these verses are answering a fundamental question, which is that we have said that emptiness is a very profound teaching, and that the propounder or teacher of that, the Buddha, is an unmistaken teacher. And indeed, Buddhahood can be achieved through this. However, even though we have set this forth, there are still many who will not accept or enter into this teaching, or who will doubt it. So why is this the case? So actually, these verses are answering that fundamental question. So one of the reasons that people don't enter these teachings which have this possibility and are spoken by a faultless teacher is because of their habituation to the afflictions and the mistaken way of thinking. Due to those habitual tendencies, then they are not able to perceive the qualities of this teaching and enter into it. So therefore, in order to truly enter the teaching, the hearer of the Dharma has to be one who possesses the qualities that are laid out in this verse. So Geshe is just explaining that because I think this verse is often quoted in the Lamrim, right? So he's just explaining that here actually in the root text, there are 3 qualities of the student, of the hearer of the Dharma that are mentioned. But in Chandrakirti's commentary on this text, he talks about 5 qualities of the listener. So these 3 qualities are that the student is unprejudiced, intelligent, and interested. So without these types of mind and without an unprejudiced attitude, one will not be able to enter into the profound teaching of emptiness expressed by the Buddha. So unprejudiced is really describing a mind that is fundamentally honest. That means one is able to accept something not based merely upon whether the person saying it is close or far away from them, and sort of divorced from this attitude which holds some close and others distant. In this way, they can make an honest evaluation and enter into the teaching. Yeah, so being sort of straight-minded, being honest-minded is a very important quality for the student.
And
the next one is intelligent, and here we're talking about intelligent in terms of endowed with wisdom. If the student doesn't have at least a little bit of wisdom, it will be hard for them to enter into the teaching.
어다 야강에는 데렌 두강에는 로그상에는 데렌 토자 아까서로 부자 데렌서 오야와 때시야지면 건주마 와스.
So if there's not wisdom enough to be able to identify, for example, what is unwholesome, what is wholesome, therefore what should be rejected and what should be accepted, then it will be very difficult for the student to progress in the teaching.
바주이나 단위지 건설레와 여와셔도 매이자 안주는 셰마르나 셀류나 다다토니 마유 거와스.
Can you say again?
바주 안주 안주는 세줄류가 있나요? 세시지줄류가 있나요? 그 데보 매이자 마유 그래. 셰마줄류가 있나요? 집아서 마유.
So there is a saying that and so the cow, and not saying that we don't love cows, but the cows are kind of used as an analogy of a creature that's not necessarily intelligent. So it is said that whether you pour sand into a cow's ear or whether you pour gold dust into a cow's ear, it will shake its head to get rid of it, right? Which means it doesn't possess that discriminating intelligence. So we need to have that wisdom really enough to be able to discern between what is beneficial and not beneficial, or wholesome and unwholesome. And then finally, in order for the teaching to come about well, one doesn't merely need those two things. One also needs to be interested in what is being said. And Chandrakirti adds to these 2 points. The first of which is having a respect for the Dharma that is being spoken and the person speaking the Dharma. So respect for the Dharma comes through seeing its tremendous benefit, seeing it as something very holy, right, and precious.
So
respect for the teacher doesn't mean these false flowery expressions, and Geshe said that he's not criticizing necessarily all of you. Also, a lot of Tibetans do this. It's not kind of like floor scraping, right? That's not really how you show respect for the teacher. You show respect for the teacher by putting effort into actualizing, to studying and practicing his or her teachings.
And
the last one, the extra 2, so the 5th is stable-minded. He or she is stable-minded. Right. So steady-minded, and Geshe said in this particular context, what we mean by steady-minded is able to focus on the Dharma that is being taught and spoken, right? Not having the mind going in a lot of places like Kedrup. I'm kidding. But yeah, hopefully not so double. So yeah, steady-minded and able to stay on what is being spoken. Yeah, that's very important. So Geshe said a false modesty on my part. No, it was genuine modesty. Don't trust what you see on TV, in other words. Okay. And now we come to a discussion of, okay, we've talked about the qualities that the listener needs to have. Well, what about the person who is speaking the Dharma? What qualities do they need? So Geshe said, sorry, going back to 276, the last 2 lines, neither the teachers nor the students' good qualities will be taken as false, right? So if these 3 or 5 qualities are possessed, you won't fall into that trap.
지 스마디다.
Yeah.
마워예데 노예데 먼저 년보라요미.
So good qualities will not be taken as faults. This is very important.
어다 던지게 예대지요나. 하고서 어다 손지세야 될 이나래. 드니 예대지 통거마도 예대래 예대 아또 드니 시에 통마레스.
So when you are unprejudiced, intelligent, interested, and so forth, what that means is that when the Buddha's Dharma is spoken, because you possess these fundamental qualities, you will be able to see the positivity, the wholesomeness of what is being shared, right? You are not likely to do fault finding with it.
어다 다티다다 이나래 응마이나래 어다 손지라요 시뭐 예대게 뭐 용기 와레스. 미 손질의 시제기 뭐뭐로 용 거로 왔어. 제제기 어다 대제 강그 소소그 시에도 마통하지 하고서라와 얼랭가 바티 전에는 손질 시에 통용 거 알아요.
And we can see that what happens with this, even from the stories of the lifetime of the Buddha, right? The Buddha had many critics. You could even say people that saw themselves as his enemies, right? But why this happened, because we know that the Buddha was a faultless being. Why this happened was because rather than looking at their own inner faults, they were always focused at finding the faults of others. And because of this, actually, the residue of their own inner faults, this was like a veil through which, because of which they perceived faults in those who was faultless. Yeah, but if you have the 3 or the 5 qualities that we mentioned, you will not fall into this problem. So now the qualities of the speaker of the Dharma, because Geshe said that if you didn't share that, it's like he's being dishonest, right? He's trying to hide something about him. So Geshe said the next one is that the sound is clear. So you won't see that in the root text in 277 here, but this is in the commentary by Chandrakirti. So clear sound. So really a clear sound of speaking, and also not a wavering, like maybe it's this, maybe it's that, a sound, a clarity and a purpose of sound. So Geshe said that in order to get that clear sound, then you see that we're always tinkering with the microphones and so forth. So that actually is important, right? It's important for the sound to be clear. And then the next one is Tamodisena Sidang Tabshiwayu. Yeah. So out of these 2, which are in the commentary once again, it's that clarity of the speech, and the second is the clarity of meaning. So an ability to speak the meaning. And so then the words and the meaning both need to be unmistaken and unconfused. This is also important.
This one.
And so Geshe said, and he's not sure where we are in the count. So he said maybe number 3, he's not sure. But anyways, the speaker of the Dharma is able to speak in accordance with the needs of the listeners. He or she is able to speak in accordance with the needs of the listeners. And finally, the motivation of the speaker of the Dharma is a good motivation for the listeners, right? It is not a motivation to procure something for themselves, nice things to eat, nice things to drink, a comfortable lifestyle, and so forth. So it says not for the sake of requisites. The Tibetan word is sangsing. These are like the requisites. So not for the sake of requisites means not for the sake of like worldly things. things, right? Like food, drink, and so forth.
어다 든지지래. 어다 시킬라요 때 예대 벌써 좀 한번 먹고 근데 예킬라요 때 예대 벌써 좀 한번 대니데 초소나 다 드니 비도 버지로 해지요.
So the listener of the Dharma needs to possess many important qualities, and the speaker of the Dharma also needs to possess important qualities. When the speaker and the listener both possess the necessary qualifications, then things can come out well.
어다 대야 쇼로가 지에데스 오지 시워세나만도 어제 진도 소상오지 막갈려 거와.
Shlokanika logimbe.
이봐.
Yeah.
다 시도 시다 셔와이 타도 대저 실수된 이때 요즘 뭐시고 되는 더 왔다 윙에.
So Geshe said, we'll leave it here, having covered one verse, but I said maybe if you could just read so people have the transmission for verse 277. So Geshe has read it. He explained existence and its causes, the means to peace and peace itself. What people do not understand is seen as the subduer's fault.
어다 시도 시타 샤데 리브 둥아데마도 접근주 데마니 되세요레스.
Age.
시도 시타.
Yeah. So when we say existence and its causes, we can relate this to the Four Noble Truths as being talking about
시샤데 둥아데마. 시타 샤데는 접근주 데마 있어요.
So the existence would be the true sufferings, and the causes would be true origins.
셔와이 타도 대저 샤데가 당 무대도 로데니 되기신다.
The means to peace and peace itself, these are true paths, the peace, and true cessations, peace itself.
어다 근데가 안돌 끼워 봐 수미가라. 어다 손지가 둥아데마 근지 데마 지보자는 안도 세트 오전에 대비할 수 있는 거와스. 우어들은 고대도 로데지 수 있는 거와스.
So His Holiness often mentions that the Buddha, he didn't want us to be kind of upset or miserable. So he didn't stop his explanation at true sufferings and true origins, right? There's lots of reason to be positive because he also explained true cessations and true paths. So we can understand peace to refer also to cessation here.
Yeah.
And the means to peace we can understand as the path which one cultivates to achieve that liberation, which is ultimate peace. So the Buddha laid out this perfect path to be able to cultivate peace and its causes for us, but there are those who are not able to comprehend the truth of what he taught, and because they don't understand, they then see what he taught as faulty. So in this way, brief explanation, we have covered 2 verses today. So thank you very much. And now with a happy mind, let us dedicate the merits of the session. If afterwards you need to get on with your day, please do. But if you'd like to stay for questions, you're most welcome. Chongju semjo grimboje maje bano jenjoje jewa nyamba meba gone gondo bewa jo tongni tawa rimboje maje bano jenjoje jewa nyamba meba gone gondo bewa jo jambe baye jada jamba do gondo zambo deyo dejo de da gunjo jisa dalo jo gewa ni da tonje ra do mo deso jebe gawa donje je mo wa chodo ngava de dagi geve sawa de gojo zambo je rada ngava.
Roger Kangi was out of Sabanjava Tini Baltalatini. What that mother to the silly and I dash on Matu Niju, shall I chat about you?
Through the merits that myself and others have collected, may all beings, humans, animals, and so forth, achieve the blessing to be able to bring forth the minds of love and compassion.
Richu Kawai Sina in Lichikang, Senjikang, Kanga, but Chabashawan, which the she in Jelando. Lichikang, Senjikang, Chabashawan, which by Shu Jelando.
Through these merits, may all of the 6 types of sentient beings, may whatever mental or physical suffering they experienced be completely cleared away, like ice is melted away by a warm rain.
Roger Kangatan Lydia Seki Japas so much.
Through these merits, may the causes for physical health and mental health of all sentient beings be accomplished. So think today I've been able to use this human rebirth in a positive way and feel that I have accomplished something good. And if we think about great beings such as the Buddha, don't forget that what allowed their realization to unfold was the initial bringing forth of this mind of compassion. So everything good that unfolded from the Buddha in a really stable way, it started with that point of compassion. This is important to remember. And so don't think that, nothing is happening, that like it's just prayers and so forth. Slowly, if we remain steady, we'll be able to bring it forth. And we know that the Buddha's kind of positive unfolding, right? It said that the first place where he was able to bring forth that unbearable compassion is actually while he was inhabiting the hell realm. So certainly it's possible for us to bring forth compassion. Ale. Ale, loso.
사고 보바더니 저거야.
Yeah.
야가더니 뭐 야라와.
Yeah.
어떤이서 그 지금 보기 시에서 손지.
Ale, DJ라.
Ale.
So then it is said that actually the rebirth that happened after the being who became the Buddha brought forth compassion in the lower realms. He was reborn in a human form as a potter, as somebody who makes pottery. Yes.
Yeah, those.
And so the Buddha of that period is one of the previous Buddhas of this fortunate aeon. When he came by, then this being who became Shakyamuni in his future lifetimes, he presented one of these pots that he had made to that Buddha. And at that time, that Buddha of the past period, he said, may you become equal in realization to me, and may your name become as well known as my name is. And this was kind of a prophecy, right, of Shakyamuni's future enlightenment. And it took a long time, maybe hundreds or maybe even thousands of lives, but eventually, right, that potter, he became fully enlightened and became Buddha Shakyamuni. So sorry, a little bit too long today. So questions, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dana.
Oh, thank you. Mine is just a quick question about you mentioned collective karma when you were talking about one of the stories of the Buddha, and he couldn't, when he was trying to intervene in a big conflict, the collective karma was too strong. So my understanding of karma is that it's our individual actions that follow us, right? So I was wondering whether you could explain like what collective karma is and how that works.
Yeah.
Please?
Yes. Yeah, I would say as a first step, think about the story of the whale, Donna, but I will put this to Geshe. Also, nguma di tomba chomdende densik latene ko ma di mepa sotu masons karinse na tumongwele ine dana chena ngaron so gidrebu tu go giredu dene mi re chene console tu gore mato tumongwele samsu di yomare di kandes yongi resa.
So
I think Geshe is kind of putting a question back to you, Donna, which is that all of us human inhabitants of this world, right? We're all occupying the same world. So in order for that to be the case, we must have some karma in common, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lumba soso inere, zombali sheton inere, zombali bitani tomo inere. Lumba soso ino tomo ate koro tomo.
So all of us human inhabitants of this world, we have a collective karma, a similar karma of inhabiting this world. And then if you think about whichever country you're living in, so whatever particular country you're in, you share the collective karma to inhabit the same country as the other inhabitants of that country where you live. Yes. However, think that the country or the city where you're living, that there's a calamity, a disaster, for example, a flood. So everyone has the collective karma to experience that flood. However, some people may die from that flood and others may be able to survive it. That is their individual karma.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah. So
Geshe said that this topic of karma and talking about collective and individual, these are actually complicated things. So it really, they're things that we need to look at again and again. So he'd like to say one more thing on Donna's question, if he may. So one day the Buddha, he departed to a faraway land. And the ruler of that land was a very terrible person. And the ruler of that land told people that when the Buddha comes here, none of you are permitted to give him alms. None of you are permitted to offer him food, because if you offer him food, there'll be a terrible natural disaster that happens in this place. So if But unfortunately, actually, the Buddha arrived in this land at the time of Yarne or Vasa, which is that time of the rain's retreat where strict monks and nuns, they have to abide in the same place for a fixed amount of time. So if the Buddha wasn't able to get any food at all, right, by keeping that discipline of the rain's retreat, it would be a pretty bad situation. And at that place where the Buddha was living, there was a herder of horses. And the horse herder, actually, he gave some of the horse food to the Buddha. Sangila Tesama. But he didn't give human food
아니 그가와 다 손질 자와친 보이스 다 간조도 할래야 뭐です다 손질은 데서 따이 칼라사기슌 세네파 세폰 할래야 그 강해친 보.
And so the Buddha arrived at this place with some of his disciples. So Ananda and some of the other venerable monks, they thought like, it's okay for us to eat this food because like we're kind of just ordinary, but it's something really terrible that our teacher, the Buddha, has to eat something like this. And maybe Ananda became so upset that actually he was weeping.
아니 든지지를 손지게서는 그거 저러 세포 그 말레스 손지 코를 강은 논내라 춘주지 지래는 기대 말레스.
But the Buddha said, Ananda, you don't need to worry. And he took a morsel of food that was in his mouth and placed it in Ananda's mouth. So he had chewed a little bit of this horse food, right? And he put it in Ananda's mouth. And so Ananda had the experience of this morsel of horse food that was the most delicious food that he had ever tasted in his lifetime. And so this relates to something that you'll see in the 4th chapter of the text called the Abhisamayalamkara, the ornament of clear realization, that says no matter what the quality of food is that is presented to a Buddha, it will always be experienced as delicious. This is one of the qualities of the Buddha. And so at that time also the Buddha's disciples asked the Buddha, why are we in this strange land and experiencing these difficult circumstances? And the Buddha, through his clairvoyance, said, he said that it was because the Buddha himself and his disciples were of like a higher position in society and were continuously looking down on others. So this was the karmic result of that. And so did the Buddha have to experience a suffering result from that circumstance? No, but he was also there in this story, and this also illustrates the kind of importance of karma or cause and effect. Yes. And also it brings forth the one of the 4 points of karma, which is that karma accumulated must be experienced. And in fact, karma is a very difficult topic to understand in Buddhism. It is said to be even more difficult to penetrate than emptiness. So when we have the coarser manifestations of karma, to see those cause and effect connections, maybe that's like a little bit easier, but the subtle understandings of karma are more difficult to comprehend even than emptiness. So are there any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Amy has a question. By allowing a harm doer to do harm, at the same time, you might be fulfilling previous negative karma. Are you not also helping the harm doer generate more negative karma at the same time?
Yeah. Nanso numa di nanso di nupa kegindi nanso nupa sonana roadene di legi drebure samna di chikche ine nanso legi drebure samne chikyang masona dene nupa kegindi korongi le duksha chik sagire dua di tes nyogdramare beda which.
Yes,
no, it is a problem with the harm doer, and it is said that even the holy beings say, may the harm doers not have longevity, right? They're like saying that may they have a short lifespan, thinking of that karmic perspective. Yeah. So sometimes it's better, in fact, for the being to pass to the next life if they are engaged in very heavy negative or harmful actions.
Yes.
And so Geshe's advice here would be transform the way we think about it. But yes, if there's an action that you can take to prevent the harm, you should take that action to prevent or start the harm, or stop, sorry, the harm. But it's very important that you don't combine that with an ill intention. With an ill intention. That's very important.
다 좀 못어 봐도 강에 채가도 다 드니 내서 채는 저와 또 매반다고 드니 요게 드니 쉬소나.
Yeah.
디 소소가 리트셀 많이 봐지.
Yeah.
온 연락이 다 지요 알았어.
But if you are in a situation, and this situation does happen where there is harm that you are experiencing or misfortune that you are experiencing, and realistically, there's not anything that you can do to change that situation, then really this advice holds, which is that rather than grasping onto it as a bad thing, we see it as results of karma and so forth, and we use those different ways of thinking as a way of taking the difficult circumstances into the path.
손지 탈락해빈도 세지요 알았어. 아까 살아봐. 너 손지 탈락해빈도.
Tabla kepedo. Yeah.
어따 뒤에 놀았더니 잡었던데 그랬더니 저 손지가 로마더니 알아봤어. 다 걸어서 잡어 있어. 잡을래까 뭐 알아봤어.
So there is a sutra known as the Younger Sutra, giving the younger Sonam?
탈락해빈도.
Known as the Sutra of Skillful Means. And this sutra is about a student of a Buddha who is a king. And of course, a king has to engage in different actions and make difficult decisions.
아니 다 손지가 내봐시 유아 말지 세다는 거 누지 계자 뭐시 얘기를 왔어. 아니 잡어티게서는 손지 드니 그마자케도 다 내봐시 담아서 kelle선 대녀바도 그마로 간에서 그래서.
And so of course one of the Buddha's kind of the linchpins of the Buddha's teachings is non-harmfulness, not to harm others. And so the king kind of objected. He said to the Buddha, well, what am I supposed to do then with people who murder and steal and do all of these other terrible things? Like if I don't mete out punishment, they will do those negative things more and more.
다 대절은 예빠 또 그래. 뭐 아버지 와야 된다.
로스.
이나요 꾸발 출한도야. 라빠 출한도야. 면 출한도야. 드니 예빠 마도.
And so the Buddha said, yes, in order to correct their behavior, they must be punished, but do not punish them in the way of lashing, chopping off hands, and so forth, right? In those days, these were common punishments. So do not punish them in those ways.
다 열날 배도 출한도야 그래가 저는 걸 배도 무슨 출한도야. 대마서 이나 여보 자야기 때문에 예빠도 그래.
Because if you punish them in that way, losing their limbs and so forth, then they become even more incapable of supporting themselves well. But so you should offer a punishment which helps them to reform.
어떤 안 좋고 된다 오래 다 소소 그게 바치과 그거는 내가 과 그거는 파 가서 여보 자야기 때문에 내가 지치고래.
But those methods which do not kind of harm them in that terrible way, but methods which may help them to reform and live their lives in a better way, you should punish them like that. But do that separated from a mind of ill intent, from a mind of vengefulness. So next, any others? Any other questions?
Yeah. I've got a question. So I understand that when something bad is happening and you have no control over it, you use this way of thinking to protect your mind and not to suffer quite so much, at least mentally. But my question is, how can we, if we've got negative karma in our mind, what can we do to prevent bad things from happening at all?
Okay. Nganso kange duksha di chik tuna roa dene nganso gelken lam dukya roa samlo tangores dene nganso dungel tama tes nyungru drogres di hakutsa so roa ine nganso kange yongya gi gyu semnangla mambo yores roa denso gyu drebu mayongya kandes chik mebosogres.
야 단다 강에 누야 티가 강 괜히 강가 지르르서 내치도만 좀아서나 리라고 좀 전도 그러와
kandes
소소 그만을 괜히 요나 가서 가라 대지 가디잖아 셀 강에 요와 하고서 휴진 때에서 휴진 때에서는 괜히 하대 그러와 강가 지르르서 내치도만 좀아서나 그거 뭐 전도 그러와.
So Geshe is giving an analogy related to Dave's question, which is imagine that you have like a really messy house where there's like a lot of clutter and dirt. And so if every day you take out one or two things or you sweep a little part of that house, there's still going to be all that other stuff there that is going to disturb your mind. So what would the solution be? The solution would seem to be to collect all of the trash and the dust and the clutter into one big pile and then carry it out all at once, right?
할래야 메스 다 니가 셔와 도마메 바르사 랭에 몸보지 다 니가 종아서 고치는 그래 somebody 템보 이치소나 다 텐데지세요.
So his answer would be, Dave, to experience that problem and think, may this problem be experienced as the ripening of all of the negativities I've experienced from beginningless lifetimes until now, and in this way may it be completely purified, and then this may help to prevent the unfolding of suffering in the future.
하고서 어다녀리 릴라보도야 말아 와서 어떤 하고서래 된다 녀래 침보질 쟁에 로트 저 침보질 된대요.
So it's not an easy practice, but that would be a way to practice this essential of instruction of transforming unfortunate conditions into the path, but doing it in a way that purifies the karma, which would have us encounter those future difficulties.
Right, yeah. An old friend, David Gonzalez, I remember him saying that's exactly what he thought about his illness. May this be all my negative karma illness happening right now. I thought that was kind of a courageous way of thinking.
Ako tropochi kalepe natsa duksha chik nyong nero adene natsa duksha din kandislaw gare le duksha chat sama toba mepane. Exactly, Geshe said, and that in fact that will not worsen your illness at all. In fact, it will become an assisting factor in your realization. So that's really the best way to think. So that's the same for us. Geshe said he himself experienced all kinds of difficulties and moments of unhappiness. Kedra experiences all kinds of difficulties and unhappiness, right? This is part of kind of abiding in this realm, but what we try to do is to think about it in a different way so that that difficulty can become progress on the path. So by thinking in this way, the problem, it will be of a less disturbance to our mind, and rather than compelling us to affliction, in fact, it will be something that helps us to progress along the path. So this really starts by changing our way of thinking.
가서 손지기 주지 손지기 주의래냐라 졸리와 녀다 차보더는 거는 뭐게 뉴스나 손을 가르치고 있어. 그래서 뉴스는 가서 마소 야버려 손을 돈 되게 대할래야게 라자 침버려.
So one of the students of the Buddha, he said that the Buddha asked the student, what would you do if you go to this country? It was a difficult place and people strike you or abuse you when you go on your alms round. And he would say that I would think, how fortunate that I just had a little strike or a little bit of an unpleasant word rather than them trying to kill me, right? And also having that sense of perspective about our problems is important. And so actually in that way, right, like that particular student of the Buddha, from experiencing that difficult situation, rather than it becoming a fault and a source of affliction, it actually became a quality to help them progress along the path. So similarly for most of us, right, we're not getting hit. So if someone says something unpleasant to you, you can think, well, at least they didn't hit me, right? Just to have a perspective of our problem.
Okay.
Yes. So the Buddha praised the student who said that he would think in that way. And he said, you can really take what is a fault and turn it into a quality. Therefore, you can go to this dangerous place, because the Buddha hadn't let the other students go there. So we see like it's a really powerful cultivation to take what's actually quite a terrible situation, a terrible fault, but transform it into a quality from the perspective of one's practice.
So can
you think about like how much better your life would be if when someone criticizes you or says something unpleasant to you, you're just like, no big deal. They didn't hit me or something like that, right? You're becoming a lot less disturbed by those things you're going to encounter. Right. So we have, it's hard, right? Maybe not always possible, but we do have the opportunity to change the way that we think about our difficulties.
나도 제 디자 말아 메게 따도 디자 지시나 노서 트노야.
But for most of us, it's a little bit far off. Like much less somebody saying something nasty to us, even if somebody gives us a weird look, we become very affected and upset, isn't it?
That reminds me, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, when we have problems, we should think it's like chocolate.
Zopa Rinpoche Lama Zopa nganso di nyodra yena deni chocolate dapo chik sigo gire to us.
야, 드니서 세메 예텔 따토는 계속 좀 된대래 왔어.
Yes, so seeing the qualities of problems is actually something that can really bring us benefit. Really, really.
야.
That's it, I think.
Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Geshe said, are there any questions again? I think we're okay. All right.
야,
Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy.
Thank you, Venerable Kedrup. Thank you, Geshe La.
야,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Congratulations, conseguiu.
Have a nice holiday or rest of your